Excellent. Thank you for having me today. This is a wild time for all of us, I think. So I'm hoping that some of what I have to talk with you all about today can help you all through this time. I'll be talking about two major topics today. I'll have a couple slides where I talk about what people are dealing with commonly, since it may help you put a name to things you're dealing with. And realizing that you're not alone when dealing with complex issues can be helpful. Secondly, I'll be talking about some basic ways to practically tackle these issues. I do want to mention that it has been brought to my attention that the slides can be hard to read, um, but don't worry about it. Don't stress and try and look at it too hard. I think you're missing out on any content. They're really just kind of bullet points highlighting what I'm mentioning, except there's a quote at the end that I'll be reading out loud, anyways. So, um, I will start out by talking about some of the themes that we're seeing as a result of this pandemic. So, I'll preface this by saying that these issues are not observed because of large scale methodological studies. There really hasn't been time to look at stuff like that yet. These themes are just things that have been brought up by other counselors and amongst ourselves and what we've been seeing in our clients, and are often topics put forward in common media outlets like PBS and Psychology Today. The first and perhaps most obvious issue is that there have been issues around staying connected, right? Usual places to engage socially have no longer become options. Um, However, this has also even spread to surface level social interactions, meaning that a lot of people aren't even getting things like the water cooler conversations in the workplace. Furthermore, while those who have hobbies such as gaming are able to make comparable adjustments, those who have hobbies that don't translate well digitally are having a more difficult time. Those who live alone are also having challenges, of course, compared to those who live with others. A final interesting talking point on this is that, and that one that is far more common than people think, is that those who do events such as virtual social meetups, like a happy hour among friends, are becoming more insecure about continuing those activities. Mostly, this is because a lot of folks who did this at the beginning of quarantine have become fearful that they won't have anything interesting to talk about. Um, and since there really hasn't been much excitement in life. And it's unfortunate that this is such a pervasive fear, particularly since lack of excitement and variation in daily routine is something virtually all of us have been going through. Secondly, the fact that this pandemic falls into a more existential category makes it hard for our brain to deal with. Our minds are programmed to deal with issues on a pragmatic level. This makes sense since our brains are wired to keep us alive and handle perceived threats in a efficient manner. Unfortunately, anxiety, definitionally, is when our biological fight or flight response occurs at inappropriate times. Our current situation is not one that is possible for our brain to figure out how to deal with because neither fight nor flight is dealing with the problem. And when the brain doesn't know how to deal with that, um, it sort of it loses control in a way. It that's when emotional turmoil can get out of control. Because of this, and along with the fact that the threat is impacting virtually all facets of our life and that it does not have a definitive end, our mind's stress response is seriously heightened. And in my experience, those who have struggled with flexible thinking and maybe view things too commonly in black and white, like think of a very, very type A person, they've had a particularly hard time with this aspect of the pandemic. And related to this, even for those of us who have gotten more accustomed to the new normal, another problem is that the bandwidth for additional stressors has been decreased. Think about it this way: our mind has had to and continues to adjust in a very different and divided world. Dealing with stressors such as marital problems, work stress, family drama, etc., is hard enough on its own. But because of the climate we're in, even stressors that are far less troublesome suddenly become exponentially more emotionally draining. And a specific advice I have for this is to be more mindful of your internal dialogue. The moniker I have for people is to just think what you're really upset about. Are you really truly worried that your significant other will just randomly leave you? Or did a small issue just become a bigger issue because you're already feeling anxious? And naturally, we're also seeing a lack of ways for people to express themselves and indulge in hobbies. This seems obvious and minor, but the fact is, this is causing increases in anxiety and depression. Many people have found themselves without any way to do things that bring them joy with their free time. This leads to monotonous, draining days that increases pessimistic outlooks since many people are having difficulty finding something to look forward to on a day to day basis. Finally, of course, practical concerns such as employment and financial security, health, fears around political division have contributed to a decline in many people's mental health. So there are some other common phenomena that are worth noting. Allostatic load is something that has gotten more attention these days. And this refers to low grade, constant stress and the physiological impact it has on our body. As we continue to deal with the stressors of the pandemic, such as being isolated, having limited access to our hobbies, etc., the mental toll becomes much harder to deal with over time. Stress is not either there or it's not, despite what we may think. And this phenomenon explains why we may have increased issues with mental health, even if the stressors themselves have not changed much. Zoom fatigue has also been common. Interestingly, this is because of how the brain is subconsciously navigating nonverbal cues. Because of internet lag and the lack of shared physical environment, the brain is constantly trying to fill in the gaps of the missing nonverbal cues. This can be exhausting. And oftentimes, the people who are dealing with the consequences of Zoom fatigue don't even realize that that's what's contributing to their mental fatigue. It is also common for old issues that have not bothered us for a long time to become struggles again, seemingly out of nowhere. This is something that often happens when a stress we can't control, such as anxiety from a global pandemic, is prolonged. In an effort to deal with the stress, the brain attributes that stress to problems it is accustomed to having to deal with, since your survival oriented brain is going to see that as a way of maximizing the chances of overcoming the threat. Needless to say, this is an example of a sort of a biological survival strategy not suiting us well in every circumstance. So, how can we keep track of our mental health with internal strategies? To start, let's talk about dealing with our internal thoughts. Behind every troubling, intrusive thought is a positive value. Now, what I mean by this is that since our brains want to protect us, when we have thoughts such as, I'm afraid my friends don't care about me, our brain is perhaps in an unhelpful way pointing to a positive value about how we care about our friends and want to keep them close. So when you focus in on the value behind the thought, you can try to redirect your energy into thinking of healthy ways to live into that value rather than focusing on the negative thought itself. So, for example, in response to the thought about friends not caring about you, you could take time thinking about instances where they have shown they care about you and ways you could stay connected with them. The next two bullet points go together, but which one works best for you might vary based on whether you're an internal or external processor. So, because the nature of what we're dealing with is existential, it is easy to become overwhelmed by everyday stressors. Taking time to speak aloud fears and goals, ideally to an empathetic ear, can help your brain put out of control fears into perspective. Another tactic can be to write down those same fears and goals that you have. It seems simple, but when you're overwhelmed by many different things floating around, putting them on paper can help your brain realize that these issues are things that can be dealt with. Anxiety is at its core about control over a situation we realistically don't have any. So, by seeking out ways to practically tackle and focus in on things that we do have control over, we can start to manage our emotions more effectively. Finally, radical acceptance refers to taking time to make peace with unideal circumstances. Often, this takes the form of making peace with seemingly conflicting truths. It can both be true that we wish things were different and that there are ways we can make changes to make this difficult time more manageable. Another example, it can be true that we aren't able to connect with others the way we'd like. And at the same time, it can be true that we can find new and acceptable ways to create or maintain our connections. It is also important to note that radical acceptance also makes room for negative thoughts. Negative thoughts aren't bad, and it is important to acknowledge our negative emotions and make space for them. Only by acknowledging these feelings and not pushing them away can we move toward radical acceptance. And please know too, it is absolutely okay to seek help if your emotions become too difficult to manage on their own. Uh, there are many counselors out there who can help. Psychology Today is a great resource to find a counselor, especially because you can filter out counselors by gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, and more in order to find a good fit for what you're looking for. So we've covered the internal solutions, so now we can move to external strategies. First and foremost, get outside. Now, this doesn't have to mean literal outdoors, but it's important to try and change your scenery occasionally. This becomes especially important when you're working from home. You want to make sure you have distinct spaces for work and relaxation, since, for example, you don't want to ruin your sleep pattern because your mind is starting to associate work and stress with your bedroom. On a related note, trying to exercise can be very helpful, and not just for physical health. Exercise has been shown to release chemicals that improve overall mood, even if the activity itself is not as fun. However, do be careful not to focus too much on body image these days, which has been another common stressor. It's because of an overall lack of option for physical activity and being stuck inside. Hyper focusing on any weight changes is not a good idea. I mean, it's not a good idea in or out of a pandemic, but just make sure you're taking care to separate value judgments from about yourself from any physical appearance changes your body might be going through right now. And finally, don't shy away from virtual connections. This can be a great way to stay connected, whether it's a video chat or watching a friend stream something on Twitch or another platform. Uh, but I mention this because there should be some flexibility, since people might be understandably tired of video chats. So don't take it personally if a friend needs to take a break and turns down an invite. So, what can faith do for us now? The first thing is to realize that faith communities are a place where meaningful action and connection can be found. Those are good things. But if your faith is waning these days due to lack of connection and purpose, step one is to not feel ashamed about it. Many of us were taught to treat lack of enthusiasm about faith as a negative character judgment about ourselves, and that's incredibly unfair to ourselves. Additionally, it is okay if your faith communities these days look and act different. We may be going back to more of a home church model in our faith's history, and I think that that's okay. It's just about making peace with it. Again, think radical acceptance. It is okay to both miss your old community and invest meaningfully in a faith community that looks different or is even made up of different people altogether. Faith can also be used to reinforce the skills we've talked about here today. And for this, many foundational individuals of the counseling profession can offer insight. For example, Carl Rogers. He is a well-known individual for his development of person-centered therapy or client-centered therapy. Unconditional positive regard is a common phrase that comes from this approach. What few people know, though, is that Rogers was a pastor before he became known as a therapist. His background comes through in many ways in his theory, but the philosophy of unconditional positive regard is helpful to us really here. Um, since we can have unconditional positive regard for ourselves, our circumstances, and for others. This is because the philosophy of unconditional positive regard doesn't say everything is perfect or even good, but that we refrain from inherent sweeping value judgments whenever possible. Thus, it helps us deal with the difficulties of day to day living in a sustainable way, as it's much easier to not be bogged down by negativity when you're committed to a philosophy of positive regard. By pulling from key tenets of faith, such as love thy neighbor as ourselves, we can incorporate faith into our overall outlook and not just our interactions with other people in a limited way. And the last thing I'll talk about on this point comes from a principle called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. Martin Buber is a theologian whose concept of the I thou relationship was foundational to ACT. This can serve us well as we begin interacting with others that may be challenging to us over the holidays. This is not to say we should use this concept to tolerate dehumanizing behaviors against ourselves or others, but this can be helpful when navigating the difficult conversations ahead. The basic idea of it is to make a habit out of seeing God in the world around us and in the people around us. Instead of viewing people as categories, the idea is to view others on a deeper, more profound level where you are recognizing the value of creation in that person. The concept may not be completely new to many of us, but recognizing this as a theological cornerstone and lived manifestation of our faith is easier said than done, and maybe we haven't even thought of it that way before. And to kind of put this into perspective, I'll read a quote from Martin Buber's book that describes what he was trying to say here. And forgive the gendered language here, as this was a work published in 1923 and sort of shows its time. When I confront a human being as my you and speak the basic word I, you to him, then he is no thing among things, nor does he consist of things. He is no longer he or she, limited by other he's and she's, a dot in the world grid of space and time, nor a condition that can be experienced and described, a loose bundle of named qualities. Neighborless and seamless, he is you and fills the firmament, not as if there were nothing but he. Everything else lives in his light. Even as a melody is not composed of tones, nor a verse of words, nor a statue of lines, one must pull and tear to turn a unity into a multiplicity. So it is with the human being to whom I say you. I can abstract from him the color of his hair, or the color of his speech, or the color of his graciousness. I have to do this again and again, but immediately he is no longer you. And that is from Martin Buber's I and Thou. With that, that is all I have for you today. I hope you found something that is useful, even if the time was short and we covered a lot. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday and the rest of this wonderful event, and thank you for listening.